The Roman emperor who orders the census that sets this story in motion is himself called Savior on inscriptions across the empire, Augustus, whose birth had been heralded in official propaganda as the dawn of peace for all humanity.
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive, sweeping claim to make about a human ruler.
Right. And, I was looking over our notes for this deep dive, and this massive structural irony suddenly hit me. It's easily the biggest aha moment of the entire text.
Oh, definitely.
Luke writes about an angel who shows up and uses that exact same imperial propaganda vocabulary, so words like savior and peace. But the angel isn't using it for an emperor sitting in a marble palace in Rome.
No, not at all.
The angel uses those grand imperial titles for a poverty-stricken child sleeping in an animal's feeding trough. And the announcement isn't made to the Roman Senate, it's made to unrecorded field laborer.
It is just such a sharp, deliberate contrast.
Exactly. So our mission for you today in this deep dive into the source material is to fully explore that contrast. We're going to unpack the historical context, the intense political tension of the Roman bureaucratic machine, and, well, the sheer drama packed into Luke chapter 2.
And that contrast operates on multiple levels simultaneously. You have these grand, sweeping geopolitical movements of the ancient world, basically colliding head-on with the most intimate, vulnerable human moments imaginable.
Yeah, so let's look at how that collision starts.
Yeah.
What is immediately striking is that this whole narrative piece is moved into position not by some sort of visible divine choreography, but by the cold administrative machinery of an empire.
Right.
We read that Caesar Augustus issues an empire-wide enrollment decree.
The text explicitly names the empire's bureaucratic machine as the force moving the pieces on the board here. This Roman census mechanism is tied to Quirinius's administration of Syria.
Okay, and how did that actually work?
Well, the way it worked physically on the ground was that it required registration in ancestral towns. So this legal framework is what sets Joseph walking from Nazareth in Galilee, heading south to Bethlehem in Judea.
Because that's where his specific family line is registered.
Exactly. He has to go there for the paperwork.
And we should map out the physical reality of that. Mary, who is heavily pregnant and pledged to Joseph, makes this journey with him. Bethlehem sits in the Judean hill country, roughly 6 miles south of Jerusalem.
And its significance in the Hebrew tradition is heavily genealogical and prophetic.
Right.
It's the hometown of David, who is Israel's defining king, and the prophet Micah had specifically named it as the origin point of a future ruler.
Which is fascinating, but on a practical level. I mean, imagine the IRS not only auditing you, but making you walk miles to your great-grandfather's hometown just to file the paperwork.
Yeah, a total nightmare.
And doing so means you are officially signing up to be taxed by a foreign army currently occupying your country. It's basically a massive, unavoidable government data harvesting operation.
That's a really good way to put it.
But, instead of collecting your data to serve you targeted ads, it's targeted for imperial extraction. The government is effectively saying, we don't care about your physical condition, your pregnancy, or your local life. You must physically move to where our filing system says you belong.
That is the perfect way to understand the physical and psychological toll. It is an exertion of sheer, unquestionable imperial power colliding awkwardly with local kinship structures.
But here's the mystery for you before we get deeper into the politics.
Yeah.
Why was this simple bureaucratic headcount actually a live wound for the Judean people?
Right.
Like, why was it a ticking time bomb that would shape the violent world this child was born into?
Well, what's fascinating here is that Augustus's census was not just administrative housekeeping. Enrollment meant taxation.
Right.
And taxation meant Rome's hand reaching directly into every single household in every province. It was the ultimate symbol of subjugation.
So it isn't just an economic burden. It's a daily, undeniable reminder that you are a conquered people.
Yeah, and it was deeply offensive on a theological level, too. We know from the historical context that just years after this specific census, a man named Judas of Galilee launched an actual armed revolt against it.
Wait, an armed revolt just over a census?
Yes, because his argument wasn't just about unfair tax brackets, It was fundamentally religious. He argued that paying Roman tribute amounted to acknowledging a foreign master over people whose only king was supposed to be God.
Oh, wow.
So to submit to the census was, in the eyes of many, a betrayal of their covenant.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. When Luke drops this decree into his opening line with such apparent calm, his first-century readers would have felt the charge immediately.
Oh, absolutely. They knew what the census represented. They knew the blood that would be spilled over it.
And it's happening during a period of intense political volatility. Rome essentially outsourced the day-to-day ruling to local puppet kings, leaving the region in a state of managed instability.
Yeah, the client king structure of the region was a total powder keg. Herod the Great has recently died, and his territory has been divided among his sons.
But they operate entirely under Roman oversight, right?
Exactly. The local populations are squeezed between the ambitions of these puppet kings and the heavy hand of the Roman governors.
Which brings up the profound structural irony of this journey to Bethlehem. Joseph's journey is not voluntary. It is compelled by the exact same empire that would eventually execute the child being born there. Rome is forcing the movement that leads to the birth of the person Rome will later crucify.
It's incredible. The historical reality sets up a narrative where the empire is unknowingly facilitating the arrival of a figure who will challenge its foundational claims of power and peace.
So you have this massive, unfeeling bureaucratic squeeze forcing them onto the road, and that directly results in them arriving in a town bursting at the seams, which leads to this incredibly desperate makeshift birth in a feeding trough. They arrive in Bethlehem. Mary gives birth to her firstborn son, wraps him in bands of cloth, and lays him in that trough. Because the text tells us there was no room for them in the inn.
And that detail of the feeding trough anchors the narrative in a specific, verifiable poverty. This isn't a royal birth cloaked in gold, isolated in a palace.
No, mayoral.
It is a desperate, makeshift situation in a crowded, chaotic environment. Functionally, it sets up the angel's sign to the shepherds as something only the lowly would actually recognize.
Let's talk about those shepherds, because this is where the subversion of power really kicks into high gear.
Yeah.
Out in the fields, outside the town, you have laborers keeping a night watch. Suddenly, they are met by a blazing angel who announces a Savior's birth. And then an entire heavenly army appears. But why shepherds?
Well, shepherds in this agrarian society represented the very bottom of the social ladder.
Really?
Yeah, keeping watch at night meant you were out in the cold, dealing with predators, completely cut off from the religious and social life of the community. They were basically the grunts of the ancient economy. Ah, okay.
The empire counts people to tax them, which implies a system of value based on what you can produce for Rome. But the narrative here suggests a completely different kind of counting, where the marginalized are prioritized.
Think about the contrast being built here. You have an army of heaven announcing peace, juxtaposed against the occupying Roman army that maintains the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, strictly through the threat of violence and taxation.
Exactly.
And the people receiving this announcement, the ones who find the child first and broadcast the news, they are not kings. They are not Roman soldiers. They are not temple officials.
No, they're field laborers.
The exact kind of men that Roman administrative documents would never even bother to name. They run, they find a baby in a feeding trough, and they become the first broadcasters of the event. It is a complete upending of how power and information usually flow in the ancient world.
It bypasses every established channel of authority. I mean, the news of a savior bringing peace completely ignores the Roman bureaucracy, ignores the puppet kings, and ignores the religious elites in Jerusalem. Speaking of Jerusalem, the story shifts gears from this scene of rural poverty. 8 days later, the child is circumcised and named. And then, when Mary's purification period ends, the family travels the 6 miles north to Jerusalem's temple.
Right, and this movement reflects Levitical law perfectly. The text is showing us a family strictly adhering to their ancestral traditions.
Which mandated what, exactly?
2 specific things here. A firstborn son required presentation to God, and a purification offering was mandated for the mother.
But the text also gives us a receipt, essentially for their economic status during this process, because they bring 2 birds for the offering.
Yeah, and that specific detail is incredibly revealing. Bringing 2 birds, either turtle doves or pigeons, was the explicit legal provision for families who simply could not afford a lamb.
Okay, so it places Mary and Joseph unmistakably in the lower economic tier.
Exactly. They are fulfilling the law meticulously, but they are doing it with the provisions explicitly set aside for the poor.
And while they are in this massive, bustling temple, they encounter an old man named Simeon. He takes the infant in his arms and makes this sweeping, dramatic declaration. He says he has seen salvation for every nation.
Simeon's prayer, which becomes known in later liturgical tradition as the Nunc Dimittis, echoes Isaiah's servant songs almost line for line.
Wait, for those of us who aren't first-century historians, What exactly are the servant songs? And, why would quoting them in the temple make people nervous?
The service songs are a series of poems in the book of Isaiah. They describe a figure chosen by God to bring justice to the nations, but doing so through intense personal suffering and rejection rather than military conquest.
Oh, I see.
By linking this child to those prophecies, Simeon is evoking a deep, historic hope for liberation. But he also introduces something highly disruptive.
What does he say?
He turns to Mary and declares that this child is set for the falling and rising of many in Israel.
And in that specific room, in the temple in Jerusalem, those words carry serious weight. This isn't just a polite religious blessing.
Not at all. The temple in Jerusalem wasn't just a church, it was the political and economic center of the Judean world. Its priestly hierarchy actively collaborated with Roman authority to maintain order and keep their positions.
Ah.
So for Simeon to stand in the middle of that institution and predict the falling and rising of many, essentially predicting a massive upheaval of the social and political order, it would read as a dangerous political forecast.
It's an absolute disruption. And Simeon's blessing takes a really dark turn personally for Mary, too. He warns her that a sword will pierce her own soul.
Yeah.
He introduces this profound sorrow right at the moment of a family's most public celebration.
Yeah, it's very heavy.
And Simeon isn't the only one speaking up in the temple. There's also a prophetess named Anna.
Right. Anna adds her voice to this moment, speaking of the child, to everyone who is expecting the redemption of Jerusalem. But the text gives us a very deliberate detail about her lineage. She's identified by her tribe, the tribe of Asher.
Hold on. The text specifically mentions Anna is from the tribe of Asher. But I thought the northern tribes were wiped out or scattered centuries before this. Is that a mistake in the text? Or is there a reason her specific tribe is being named here?
It is entirely intentional. Asher was indeed one of the northern tribes dispersed by the Assyrian Empire centuries earlier. They were considered the lost tribes.
Okay.
So her physical presence in the temple and the explicit naming of her specific lineage acts as a powerful signal to the audience. It signals that all 12 tribes of Israel, not just Judah in the south, are watching and involved in this moment.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a symbol of total national reunification happening right under the noses of the Roman occupation.
The layers of meaning in just these few interactions are staggering. You have poverty, political prophecy, and national reunification all crashing together.
Yes.
But then the text does something incredibly dramatic with its pacing. 30 years pass in essentially 2 verses. We get this massive time jump, and suddenly we're looking at a 12-year-old Jesus.
The narrative accelerates dramatically. We move from the vulnerability of infancy straight to the threshold of adulthood in ancient Judean culture. At 12, a boy would be preparing to take on the full responsibilities of the law.
So the family is in Jerusalem for the annual Passover caravan, and this 12-year-old boy simply slips away. They travel for a whole day before realizing their kid isn't in the massive group of travelers.
Which, happens in large caravans.
Right, but it's essentially a first-century, high-stakes version of Home Alone. Except instead of setting booby traps, the kid is arguing theology with the nation's top scholars. His parents frantically search for him and finally find him 3 days later back in the temple, sitting among the teachers, trading questions, and astonishing everyone who hears him.
And the climax of this entire chapter isn't just that a young boy is remarkably intelligent or versed in the law.
Yeah.
The real weight hinges entirely on what he says when his panicked parents finally confront him. If we connect this to the bigger picture, in Luke 2:49, Jesus asks, "Why were you looking for me? Didn't you know that I must be in my Father's house?"
The narrative irony here is just brilliant. These are the very first words Jesus speaks in the entire Gospel of Luke. And who's he talking to? He is speaking directly to Joseph, the man that Luke, the author, has just explicitly referred to as his father in the previous sentences.
It creates this incredibly awkward, deeply confusing dynamic in his own family. He's claiming a completely different lineage, a different authority, right in front of his earthly guardians. Yeah. He acknowledges a father that completely redefines his identity and his purpose.
And the text makes a crucial point of telling us that his parents do not understand what he means. Think about that. Mary and Joseph have known his story since before he was even born. They experienced the angelic announcements, they heard from the shepherds, they listened to Simeon and Anna in this very temple 12 years ago.
Right.
Yet when he finally speaks for himself, asserting his place in his father's house, they're confused. The ambiguity is too thick even for the people closest to him.
It perfectly sets the stage for the rest of his life. He is embedded in the traditions and the physical structures of his people attending the Passover, sitting in the temple. yet he operates entirely outside of their expectations and understanding.
Before we wrap up, think about this for a second. Simeon gave Mary that chilling prophecy in the temple that a sword would pierce her soul.
Yeah.
For 12 years, she's been raising this boy, perhaps always looking over her shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah.
What must it have felt like to finally lose him in the crowded streets of Jerusalem for 3 agonizing days?
Terrifying.
Did she think the sword had finally arrived? It completely recontextualizes her panic when they finally find him safe, but claiming a father that isn't Joseph.
Yeah, it really does.
Well, we have covered a massive amount of ground today, from the heavy hand of Roman bureaucracy to a baby in a feeding trough, all the way to a 12-year-old holding his own with the intellectual elite.
It's been an incredible deep dive.
Now, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on today's historical drama. Specifically, I want to know how you view that incredible clash between the massive, unfeeling Roman imperial machine and the absolute poverty of a feeding trough. What does that contrast say to you about how this narrative views power?
I'd love to read those comments.
If you enjoyed this deep dive into the source material, please hit that like button and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss our future discussions. And remember, you can always check the description below for exclusive links and further reading on everything we unpacked today.
Thanks for listening.
We leave off with a 12-year-old boy astonishing the intellectual elite, introducing a central ambiguity about his father's house that leaves even his own parents confused. Next chapter, we'll see exactly how this central ambiguity begins to drive the narrative of the entire gospel as this child steps out of the shadows. Until next time.